The millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. That was the setup. Cruel, calculated, and soaked in champagne-soaked arrogance. Richard Blackwood, real estate mogul of Beverly Hills, stood in his marble-floored mansion surrounded by a circle of designer-clad guests, sipping his $500 bottle of Dom Perignon. "Let's give her a taste of high society," he smirked, holding up a gold-rimmed invitation card like a playing card in a cruel game. The room erupted with laughter. They weren't laughing with kindness. This was Beverly Hills, where elegance often masked entitlement and power was measured in how publicly you could humiliate someone who couldn't fight back. For 2 years, Victoria Temps had cleaned Richard's estate. Silently, efficiently. She dusted chandeliers taller than her apartment ceiling and polished antique furniture worth more than her yearly income. And the entire time, she had watched how these people treated one another with fake affection and treated her like part of the wallpaper. That morning, the invitation arrived. Gold foil, engraved lettering. Blackwood Foundation Gala, Saturday. Dress code, maximum elegance. Hand-delivered by Richard himself. "You must have something appropriate to wear," he said with a smirk. His wife, Helena, added, "Or maybe you could borrow something from one of the thrift stores you like." Their friends howled with laughter. The trap was obvious. They expected her to decline, or worse, show up and melt under the heat of public mockery. A little social experiment, Richard called it later, betting $100,000 with Helena that Victoria wouldn't have the guts to attend. And if she did, he said, she'd leave within 15 minutes, embarrassed, exposed, humiliated. He even invited social columnists from the LA Times and West Coast Style Weekly. A teachable moment, he grinned, for all involved. What Richard didn't know was that Victoria wasn't who he thought she was. And some invitations, when accepted, don't just shake a room, they flip the entire house upside down. While Richard toasted to his plan with laughter echoing across marble and mirrors, Victoria stood alone in her small kitchen in South Central. She looked at the invitation, took a breath, and smiled. Victoria Temps had always moved through the world like she was holding something back. Not anger, not sorrow. Something deeper, something earned. She was 35, with skin like burnished copper and eyes that didn't flinch when people looked down on her. Every Monday through Friday for 2 years, she scrubbed the Blackwood mansion top to bottom. Stained glass windows, gold-plated railings, imported marble floors. She heard everything, the whispered gossip, the fake smiles, the backhanded compliments that floated like perfume between millionaires. They barely saw her. That's how she preferred it, because what none of them knew was that this house, this same mansion with its shimmering chandeliers and echoing halls, was part of a life she once knew, a life buried behind a locked door in her memory. Her mother, Isabella Temps, had been a gifted piano teacher, brilliant, elegant. She used to walk these halls too, before being erased like a stain on expensive silk. Victoria had grown up in another wing of a mansion just like this one, with Chopin drifting through the air instead of vacuum noise. That was before the family secrets, the shame, the quiet exile. After her mother's death, everything crumbled. The allowance stopped. The house was sold. They moved from carpeted privilege to cracked sidewalks in less than a year. Victoria learned quickly what it meant to go from young lady to the help. She had never been invited back, not until now. When she got the gold invitation, she didn't panic. She didn't cry. She pulled out her old storage key from the back of a drawer and took the 30-minute bus ride to a faded garage in South Central Los Angeles. There, in a weather-worn trunk wrapped in silk, was her mother's gown. Midnight blue, hand-stitched, fitted with pearls along the collar. The last time she saw it, her mother had worn it to a gala just like the one Richard was throwing, and beside the gown, Nestled in its original case was the Blackwood family ring, sapphire stone, crest engraved on the inner band, a gift from Henry Blackwood himself, her grandfather. That ring wasn't costume jewelry, it was bloodline, proof. Victoria didn't need to shop or borrow, she just needed to remember who she was. As she held the dress to her chest, she didn't smile out of joy. She smiled like a woman sharpening a blade. She had no intention of running, not this time. The black town car pulled up to the circular driveway of the Blackwood estate like it didn't belong there, and yet it owned the moment. Guests turned their heads, expecting another celebrity arrival. But when the door opened and Victoria Temps stepped out, silence dropped like a curtain. She wasn't dressed like a cleaning lady. She looked like legacy. Her gown shimmered under the golden lights, midnight blue velvet, pearls glinting across the neckline, hugging her figure with elegance too perfect to be borrowed. Her walk was slow, measured, heels tapping against stone like a metronome counting down to something unstoppable. The valet opened the front door as if she were royalty. Inside, the crowd sipped vintage champagne, laughter curling through the air. But the second Victoria stepped through the threshold, the noise collapsed. Murmurs replaced music. Phones were drawn, but no one dared say her name. Not yet. Some mistook her for a foreign dignitary. Others assumed she was old money from New York. But Richard Blackwood, who had spent the night preparing to laugh, dropped his glass when he saw her. "That can't be," he muttered, jaw tight, eyes scanning her like she was a ghost with unfinished business. Victoria didn't glance his way. She didn't need to. Her gaze swept across the room like she was cataloguing every smirk, every scoff, every smug expression worn by people who thought they understood who mattered and who didn't. For a heartbeat, the whole ballroom forgot who they were. It was Victoria who defined the space now. And if you're still listening, don't go anywhere, because the story's just starting. The moment she entered, Beverly Hills society felt the shift. The air changed. And deep in his chest, Richard Blackwood realized something he hadn't expected. He was no longer in control. What he planned as a joke was about to unravel into a reckoning. Victoria had arrived not to be mocked, not to be pitied, but to make sure every single person in that room learned the cost of forgetting who people are just because of the uniform they wear. If this moment made your heart pound, hit that subscribe button to X Daily Stories. What's coming next will shock you, and trust me, this is one story you do not want to miss. Richard Blackwood clinked his glass with a silver spoon, grinning as if he were about to deliver a punchline at a roast. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, "allow me to introduce our very special guest tonight, Victoria, our cleaning staff." A wave of smug laughter rolled across the room like thunder. Socialites chuckled behind crystal glasses. Phones flashed. A few whispered behind manicured hands. But Victoria didn't blink. She stood in the center of the room, calm as moonlight, not a tremble, not a flinch. She turned slowly toward Richard, her eyes steady, her voice smooth enough to silence the tide. "It's funny," she said, her words slicing through the noise, "how people can speak so confidently about what they don't understand." For a moment, Richard faltered. Just a beat. But arrogance kicked back in. "Now come on, Victoria," he said with a forced smile. "We're just having fun. You clean our home, now you're here as a guest. That's progress, right?" A few guests laughed nervously, unsure which way the wind was blowing. Victoria took a step forward. "Progress," she echoed, her voice low. "Let's talk about progress." From her clutch, she pulled out a ring, delicate, antique, unmistakably unique. A large sapphire sat at its center, surrounded by tiny diamonds with the Blackwood family crest engraved along the inside. Gasps filled the room. Helena's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. That's impossible," someone whispered. Richard stared at the ring as if it were a loaded weapon. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. Victoria lifted her chin. "It was given to my mother, Isabella Temps, by Henry Blackwood, the man you call father, my grandfather." The ballroom froze. No music, no laughter, just the thick, electric hum of disbelief. "Lies," Richard said, voice cracking. "She was a piano teacher," Victoria said firmly. "Your father loved her for 5 years, and when she became pregnant with me, he promised he would take care of us. And he did, until he died. Then you, Richard, made sure we disappeared." Helena backed away from her husband. "Is this true?" she asked, voice trembling. Richard looked cornered. "She's making it up," he snapped. "This is a setup, a gold digger's fantasy." Victoria's smile was slow, dangerous. "You'd recognize a gold digger, wouldn't you, Richard? After all, you built your empire by burying people like me. But here I am, standing in your house, wearing your mother's dress, holding your family's ring, and what I'm about to reveal will make this little gala unforgettable." The crowd pressed closer, drawn in like moths to fire. Tension thickened like smoke. "I'm not your cousin," Victoria said, locking eyes with Richard. "I'm your half-sister." The gasp that followed wasn't from a few people. It swept the room. Audible shock. Mouths dropped. People stepped back as if the floor had shifted beneath them. Richard's face turned white. His lips moved, but no words came out. "And if you think that's the end of it," Victoria said, her voice calm and cutting, "you have no idea what's coming next. If you're still with us, stay close, because the secrets hidden in this mansion are about to pour out like gasoline, and the match is already lit. Subscribe to X Daily Stories now, because this isn't just family drama. This is the beginning of a legacy war." Richard raised his glass and tapped it with a silver spoon, the sharp ring silencing the murmur of conversation. "Everyone," he announced with that smug grin he wore like a mask, "I'd like to introduce tonight's guest of honor, Victoria, our faithful cleaning lady." Laughter rippled through the ballroom like cruel confetti. Phones flashed. Champagne fizzed in crystal flutes. Some guests chuckled behind sequined fans. Others exchanged raised brows, waiting for the punchline. But Victoria didn't move. She stood tall in the center of the room, her head held high, the sapphire ring on her finger, catching the chandelier light like a secret begging to be revealed. She didn't speak for several seconds. When she finally did, her voice was low but carried clear across the room. "Funny," she said, "how the ones who think they know everything are often the ones who know the least." The laughter stuttered. A few chuckles died mid-breath. Richard cleared his throat. "We're just having a bit of fun," he said. "You clean this place better than anyone ever has. Thought you deserved a taste of the party." Victoria's eyes didn't leave his. "Is that what this is to you? A taste?" She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small velvet box. With practiced fingers, she opened it and held up the ring. Sapphire center stone, flanked by diamonds, the Blackwood crest gleaming under the lights. A woman near the piano gasped. Helena stared at the ring, her voice a whisper. "That can't be." "This ring," Victoria said steadily, "was given to my mother by Henry Blackwood. Your father, my grandfather, my mother, Isabella Temps, wasn't just a piano teacher. She was the woman he loved, and I—" She paused, eyes locked on Richard. "Am his granddaughter, which makes me, Richard, your half-sister." The room fell into stunned silence. You could hear the flicker of the candles. Someone dropped a glass. No one moved. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came. He looked like a man watching his empire teeter on the edge of a cliff. "That's not true," he finally muttered, but the words had no force. "She's trying to destroy me." Victoria took a step closer. "I didn't come to destroy anything. I came to reclaim what you tried to erase." Her voice was calm, but every syllable landed like a gavel. "You had the power, the lawyers, the money, and you used all of it to silence us. But you forgot something, Richard. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. It digs itself out." A murmur started among the guests, confusion turning to curiosity, curiosity into tension. "And if anyone here still doubts me," she said, holding the ring high, "you'll want to stay exactly where you are, because this night is just getting started. If you've been listening and your heart's pounding right now, you're not alone. Don't leave. What happens next will turn every smug laugh into dead silence." Subscribe to X Daily Stories, because this isn't just family drama. It's the unraveling of a dynasty. Before Richard could scramble for a response, Victoria raised her hand and motioned toward the entrance. The massive double doors creaked open again, but this time it wasn't another guest in diamonds or a waiter with a tray of caviar. 3 people stepped into the room, each one carrying the weight of truth like a loaded weapon. The first was Diane Morrison, one of the most respected investigative journalists in California, her notebook clutched under one arm and her press badge gleaming under the crystal lights. The second was David Chun, a high-profile attorney known for tearing apart fraudulent wills and restoring stolen inheritances. And the third made Richard physically stagger. Dr. Hamilton, the Blackwood family's longtime private physician. A wave of confusion swept through the crowd, curiosity turning into dread. "What is this?" Richard demanded, already sweating through his tuxedo. "Some performance? A circus act?" Diane stepped forward calmly. "No, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice steady. "This is an official legal intervention." Guests instinctively backed away from Richard. The air in the room thickened like smoke. Dr. Hamilton adjusted his glasses and faced the crowd. "I was Henry Blackwood's physician during the last years of his life," he began. "And 20 years ago, I was pressured to sign a falsified death certificate. The truth is, he didn't die of heart failure. He was slowly poisoned." Gasps shot across the room like gunfire. Helena clutched her pearls, shaking her head. "Poisoned?" someone whispered. "Are you saying—" "Richard," Dr. Hamilton nodded gravely. He had just changed his will to include Victoria. He'd discovered his son had been siphoning money from the family company for years. He planned to report it. Then suddenly he fell ill. Richard tried to laugh, but the sound cracked. "This is insane," he barked. "Where's your proof?" Victoria didn't speak. She simply reached into her purse and handed David Chun a thick envelope. He pulled out copies of Henry Blackwood's original will, blood test results, and financial records showing over $1 million quietly diverted into personal accounts just days before Henry's death. And then came the knockout blow. Victoria tapped her phone, connecting it to the mansion's sound system. A recording played, Richard's voice unmistakable. "You'll keep your mouth shut, Hamilton. If you open your mouth, I'll make sure you never work as a doctor again, and that woman and her bastard kid, they'll get nothing." The room exploded in chaos. Guests gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others began recording on their phones. The same people who had laughed earlier were now inching away from Richard like he carried a disease. He stood frozen, every drop of power draining from his face. "You see," Victoria said quietly, "I didn't come here alone. I came with the truth and the receipts. If you're still listening, like, share, and subscribe to X Daily Stories right now. Because what's unfolding tonight isn't just a scandal. It's justice with stilettos on, and the story's not over. Not even close." Diane Morrison stepped forward with calm authority, her laptop already connected to the mansion's projection screen. One by one, documents appeared. Bank transfers, falsified ledgers, forged signatures. This is a $200,000 transfer from Richard Blackwood's personal account to Dr. Hamilton, she narrated. The memo line reads, "Silence is golden." The room was dead silent, every eye locked on the glowing screen. Then came the audio files, recordings of Richard instructing his accountant to bury funds under fake expansions, blaming market fluctuations to cover years of theft. Helena stood like a statue, arms crossed, tears silently slipping down her cheek. Richard tried to interrupt, but his voice was a shell of what it once was. "You don't understand," he stammered. "I was protecting the company." But no one was listening to him anymore. Victoria remained in the center of the ballroom, calm and unshaken. "You didn't protect anything," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "You stole, you lied, and you silenced everyone who got in your way. But not me." David Chun stepped forward with a final folder. "As of now, we are filing a $50 million wrongful death and inheritance fraud suit against Richard Blackwood. And given the new evidence, all assets are subject to redistribution under the terms of the original will." Richard collapsed into a chair, face pale, his empire crumbling around him like rotted marble. The sound of sirens grew louder, echoing from the driveway. The police had arrived. Officers entered the hall with quiet authority, reading Richard his rights as the crowd stood frozen in place. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked at Victoria with hollow eyes and whispered, "You've ruined my life." She stepped forward, heels echoing against the marble. "No," she replied. "You ruined it the moment you chose greed over blood." As they led him out in handcuffs, past the same chandelier he had once laughed under, the crowd parted like water, and Victoria, standing tall in the dress that once belonged to her mother, didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply exhaled, like someone finally releasing 2 decades of buried truth into the light. 6 months later, the Blackwood mansion didn't look the same, and neither did the name on the corner office door. Victoria Temps Blackwood now sat behind the desk once ruled by Richard, but the trophies of power were gone. In their place hung framed photos of employees, scholarship recipients, and community outreach projects. The staff, once afraid to speak, now greeted her with pride. Profits had soared, not because of ruthless deals, but because she paid fair wages, promoted based on merit, and turned the company into a force for good. The building had a new energy. People smiled in the halls. Former janitors now led departments. The same staircase where she'd once stood under ridicule now echoed with respect. One afternoon, her assistant Amanda, a woman who once scrubbed the lobby floors, entered with a soft smile. "Forbes is here for your interview," she said. Victoria nodded. She didn't care about headlines, but she knew the story mattered. A story about healing, about rising, about choosing justice over revenge. Weeks later, she received a letter from prison. Richard. His words were broken, remorseful. He wrote about the monster he'd become and how her strength had shattered the lie he'd lived in for decades. She never wrote back. Some things didn't need answers. Forgiveness, she believed, was private. Justice, on the other hand, had already done its work. Before Helena moved out of state with the children, she came to see Victoria in person. "You protected my kids when you didn't have to," she said, voice shaking. "I'll never forget that." Victoria simply replied, "Children don't pay for their parents' sins. They deserve better." And they would have it. The company now funded domestic violence shelters, mentorship programs, and community grants across California. She had turned an empire built on silence and greed into a sanctuary of progress. When asked what fueled her most, she once said, "The best justice isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building something so powerful that your scars become your signature." That night, she returned home, not to a small apartment, but to a warm house filled with books, laughter, and 2 adopted daughters who called her mom. Henry Blackwood would have been proud, not of the name, but of what his granddaughter did with it.